Chapter 4 is about using verbal and nonverbal messages in a group. As we have discussed repeatedly, there will be some repeat in here from the interpersonal class. You learned a lot about verbal and nonverbal communication in that course, but this will be more focused on what happens in a group. So we know that a message is made up of both verbal and nonverbal elements. We also know that when we use mediated communication channels like text or telephone or email or even Skype, that we lose some portions of the nonverbal or they're compromised. But we don't lose everything, because nonverbal just doesn't mean just your body movements or just your facial expressions, but it also means your tone, your rate, and your volume, for instance. Let's consider just the verbal elements of communication in a group for a moment. One aspect of our verbal messages is the idea of abstract versus concrete words. Abstract words are vague, like many, few, a lot, far. Concrete words are more specific, like for, none, or 3 miles. In this next scene, we can see an example of group members helping to clarify a vague message that used abstract words by asking for more concrete words from the group member.
Well, here's the situation. The Enrollment Management Committee met last week, and their main concern was student retention. So that's what we'll be focusing on this year.
Sean, what exactly does the university mean by retention? Having the students who are accepted actually enroll in the fall?
Well, that makes sense, Suzanne, but that's not exactly how the committee's using the term. And they mean 2 things. First, the percentage of first semester freshmen who complete the second semester, and second, the percentage of freshmen who return for the sophomore year.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
And quite frankly, our percentage isn't that good.
Sean, what exactly do you mean by not very good?
Well, at most comparable universities, the retention after the first year is about 80%. Here it's only 60%. We're losing about 1/3 of our freshman class after the first semester. It's a big problem, Jeff, one this committee must address.
Another way to be effective in your verbal messages, or to help your group communicate effectively, is to organize your ideas that you're presenting to the group, or help others in the group get their ideas organized. In this next scene, we see group members assisting each other in getting organized.
I think the main reason why our students are dropping out is because they don't know what to expect from college. For one thing, our brochures promise too much.
It's especially hard for non-traditional students to stay in school. They have so many other responsibilities pulling at them.
Well, maybe we should simply redo the brochure so it's not so glitzy, not so unrealistic. I mean, let's just tell it like it is.
Most schools like us who have a lot of commuters also provide some type of child care. That would be very helpful to the non-traditional students with kids.
We also need a more realistic orientation program. One that ran the entire first semester would help solve some of our student retention problems.
Do you have any idea how much a center like that would cost?
You mean for a continuing orientation program?
No, I'm talking about child
Okay,
care.
hold on, everybody. It's no wonder we're getting so confused here. And we're all talking about different things. Let's just focus on why we're having a retention problem. That's our agenda here. I think a big reason is because students don't know what to expect from college.
That's true, Sean. Our freshmen are really unrealistic about what it takes to do well in college. But it's not just them. Our non-traditional students also don't understand how much time and energy is consumed by taking courses.
You're absolutely right, Suzanne. We have a high percentage of non-traditional students. Most of them work, have kids, mortgage payments, and lots of other obligations. Once they enroll, they find it hard to add one more thing like school to the mix.
I agree with both of you. Once non-traditional students do find that they've overextended themselves, they are reluctant to ask for help, or they just don't know where to go.
That's also true for our freshmen, Jeff, especially their first semester when we lose 40% of them. We cover student services during summer orientation, but it doesn't mean anything to them at that point.
Right, and our exit interview suggests these dropouts feel that they have no support groups on campus.
So, an ongoing orientation program and some specific services to help reduce the pressures might help with student retention. For example, maybe offering a short-term loan program, short-term counseling, and maybe even a child care facility of some kind.
Sometimes it's hard to keep in mind that just because you're comfortable using certain words, that doesn't mean that others in the group are comfortable hearing them. If you have a choice of using a potentially emotionally packed word or not using it, the best choice is probably not to use it. And the reason is, for one thing, so you don't offend anyone in the group, and for another thing, so that you don't cause any unnecessary distraction. One easy way to see how distracting an emotional word can be is to say an inappropriate word around a child who has been told not to use such words. They immediately become unaware of anything else in the conversation, or really anything else going on in the room for that matter, and focus on the word that you said. As adults, we really aren't that much different in this respect. That reminds me of another incident that happened with my tennis group. Yes, it seems my tennis group did provide me with a lot of colorful stories. When my son was 12, he and I went to Indian Wells, California for about 5 days for my team to play in one of the USTA national tennis tournaments. It was a pretty awesome experience, and my team was one of the top 12 teams in our category in the nation, so the 12 teams were invited to come to Indian Wells to play each other, at our own expense, of course. So Alex went with me, and my husband stayed at home with our little one. After playing several matches a day for several days, my team ran into a huge roadblock. A team that was so much above our level, it really wasn't a fair fight. None of us could really figure out how this team was able to compete at our level, which is a very amateur level, and their reputation had preceded them as well as their poor sportsmanship, so we weren't looking forward to the match. As the match ended, and it ended badly, I turned to my partner and said, "Well, that really sucked." Alex turned to me in astonishment. "You told me never to say that word," he said. "Well," I replied, "you should only say it if it really applies, and in this case, it does." For Alex, that word had a lot of emotional impact, and although I'm not really sure it offended him, it certainly distracted him. Now let's consider some nonverbal communication in small groups. As we said earlier, it's more than just body movement and facial expressions. It's anything that is not the word. That can include, for instance, a person's experience. What about when someone walks into a meeting and they're all dressed up and you aren't, and you suddenly feel like the other person has maybe a bit more power in the group now than you do? Or consider where people were sitting or standing during a meeting. Did you ever notice that people often leave the place at the head of the table open until the group leader comes in, kind of inviting him or her to take that first spot if they want to? So all of these non-verbal forms of communication, they can confirm a message, they can contradict a verbal message, or they can simply stand on their own, conveying a message without any words being spoken at all. In a small group, where someone sits, a nod of the head, a roll of the eyes, these can all communicate volumes about relationships and opinions, and can both help and hinder getting work accomplished and the development of the climate of the group. We will discuss this in more detail in later chapters, but in this last video, we see how one group member who is alert to nonverbal messages helps draw another group member into the group and turn a potentially negative situation into a positive one.
Okay, after reviewing our research and our student surveys, it seems like the single most beneficial thing we can do to maintain our student retention among our non-traditional students is to set up a on-campus childcare.
Absolutely, Sean. I think that ought to be our top priority.
This is great. The Student Senate will be thrilled. They've been after us for a long time to establish some type of daycare.
Hold on, Charlotte. Before we plow full steam ahead on this, let's back up for just a minute. Dale, you haven't said a word about the child care idea. You look like you aren't completely sold.
I just think there's a lot we haven't considered here. I mean, do you have any idea of the legal liability that we'd be opening the university up to by having a university-sponsored daycare center? Or the cost that we'd be incurring?
All right, those are excellent points, Dale. And let's just see if we can itemize all the potential legal and financial and other kinds of problems we might be getting into. Just see what we're really facing here.